Jupiter Broadcasting presents this program in stereo. This episode brought to you in part by GoDaddy.com.
And welcome to the Linux Action Show, Season 18, Episode 4. My name is Chris, and joining me on the line is Alan. Hey there, Alan.
Hey.
Welcome to the show.
Brian.
No, you're not Brian, but you're filling in for him because the B-Man got sick. That or he's having to do a meth trade run. I'm not sure. It's one of the two. He's either sick or he's selling meth. I can't recall. I get the two confused. But
Yep.
just like any episode, I have a Runs Linux this week, Alan, and this one's a new one, a fresh one. Check this out. It is a little Wi-Fi router from Netgear that is 802.11n, and of course, Alan, it runs Linux. And the reason why I picked this one is this one's introducing a new kind of technology, and it's always neat to see these things running embedded Linux anyways, especially the ones like Netgear, where they let you download the source code and even play with it a bit, which means you could probably get alternative Linux-based Wi-Fi router software on this thing. This thing's pretty neat, though, because it has the ability to channel hop. If you're like, you know how if you have a client that gets on Wi-Fi and you get an AP, and the client connects to the Wi-Fi access point, and they operate on some channel. You know, just like your wireless telephone does. And that channel can have other things on the channel sometimes, especially in a busy neighborhood or like you turn on your microwave, something like that. This router will actually have the ability to negotiate with the client and change the channels that the AP operates on when the channel starts getting busy. So that's going to be pretty sweet.
Yeah, so that'll be, instead of having to divide the bit rate by the number of people sharing the channel, you can just go to a different channel.
Exactly. Yep. So that's a cool little box, and the other thing is that it has support for streaming and all kinds of stuff. And like I said, the source code is available for download.
When you make it a more open Linux platform, you can do whatever you want on it.
Well put, sir. Now, before we go on, we have a massive show, and I want to tell everybody about it. We're going to be reviewing Mandriva 2011 coming up in the second half of the show. But, Alan, perfect for you to be on today because two of our stories are the biggest stories in the Linux world from last week. One everybody knows about is the kernel.org compromise, and also a massive Apache denial of service vulnerability. And this one's a really interesting one. It's not like a typical denial of service vulnerability.
Right.
And some of the distros are already on top of this. Some of them aren't. Also, we've got rumors of Mego's death coming up that we're going to talk about. So we'll get to all of that in the news segment. But before we go on, I'd like to say thank you to GoDaddy.com for sponsoring this episode of the Linux Action Show. Now, GoDaddy.com has been a long-time sponsor of the Linux Action Show. In fact, thanks to GoDaddy's support of Linux Action Show, we're able to run the entire network because none of our other shows have advertising in them. So GoDaddy has been just a huge partner for Jupiter Broadcasting, and you can support GoDaddy and thereby support the network by using the code Linux when you check out to save 10%. Or if you'd like to check out GoDaddy's hosting, use the code Linux20 and you can save 20% on shared hosting. So check out GoDaddy.com and use our codes Linux to save 10%. Plus, how cool is it to use the code Linux when you check out? I mean,
exactly.
That's my favorite part. I know.
I've saved a lot of money using that code.
Good. Yeah, I know. I have so many domains. It's crazy. All right.
Yep.
I would like to talk to you about an app pick that is really exciting for me to talk about. This has been my free time obsession, which I don't have much of, but when I do, I have turned to this game. And I don't do a lot of game picks in my Android app picks. I really don't often do. As you will know, Alan, as a new Nexus S owner, was that a birthday present to yourself? How did that come up?
Basically.
Nice. So Alan just got himself a Nexus S, and I have all of the Android picks that I've done linked in the show notes, tons of app picks, tons of nice practical apps like SSH clients, remote desktop clients, things like that. This week, completely unpractical, but it is free, and I'm talking about Eternity Warriors. And this is a great one because it's also available for you iOS users as well. It's not exclusive to Android. It is free on all platforms, and it is a ton of fun. If you like Diablo 2, those kinds of games, those overhead RPG games, you're going to love this game. It's not quite as in-depth as those games, but it's simple, it's fun, and it's also, by the way, I should mention, free. Free to play, free online, free multiplayer, all that stuff. They do try to upsell you a little bit, but that comes, I think, with all of these games. So anyways, If you're watching the video version, I'm giving you a little video of what it looks like. I've played this on my 7-inch Galaxy Tab, and I also have it on an iPad, and it works great on both systems, and it connects with the Open Faint network or whatever that's called, so you can get your scores online and connect with friends. And it works a lot in the principle that Diablo 2 did. You meet up in the social areas, like in towns, they have a tavern and things like that, and then you go into a dungeon. And you just have your own private instance where you just duke it out with waves and waves of bad guys. You earn XP, you get new gear, get new loot, things like that. And, you know, it's a time killer. But what's great about playing it on these mobile devices is you can be playing right along. Now, with on Android, you can't go for too long, but on a lot of these, when you jump out, like if you need to check email or something, when you hit play again, it just resumes right where you left off, and you can keep playing. So I've had this closed since before the show started because I was playing a little bit on the live stream pre-show, and now I'm able to just get right back to where I was with no loss in progress. So that's one of the really great features of these operating systems, the way they suspend processes, is when you apply that to gaming, you essentially get like the ultimate pause. Yeah, and so when you have a nice lightweight game that's fun to play like that you can just jump in and out of, it's a little bit of a changer for you, and it sort of sets your expectations a little lower and lets you have fun. So check it out, link in the show notes, and of course this one also applies to you iOS folks as well. Now,
nice.
Typically, Alan, when Brian's here, we would have a Linux app pick, and that's his thing. I don't want to step on it, but this week I had a follow-up from our episode last week, so I thought I'd throw this in the app pick section because it is a free app for Linux called YBoom. YBoom. Anyways, it's wine bottle management. It's a GUI to wine bottle management. Now, just a quick recap. If you didn't see last week's episode, we had an episode, How to Run Windows Games Under Linux. And one of the things I talked about is bottles or prefixes in wine that let you have self-contained virtual Windows configurations. This lets you manage those and gives you a GUI on top of it to delete them and make changes. So go check this out. I'll have a link for this as well. And this is just a nice follow-up if you watched that episode and you wanted some of the advanced features that things like crossover and play on Linux offer, and in the case of crossover you have to pay for, but you don't want to pay for them, you just want something simple to manage bottles and you just want to use stock wine, this would be a great app for you. That's really who this is targeted at. So that's my Linux app pick on behalf of Brian being out this week.
That's awesome, because I thought that was for managing your wine collection.
Well, I hope not. No, it's not. It's wine bottle management. Yeah.
Like, wouldn't that just be any kind of it? Like, it wouldn't have to be specific to wine bottles. It's just be inventory management.
Yeah, it's a link to a Google Doc that I created, and I'm just sharing it out to the public. No, Alan. In fact, you know what? That's awesome. That's all the app picks we've got. That's all the intros we've got. Let's do the news. All right, Alan. The top story on the news docket for this week, brace yourselves, is MeeGo fading? Actually, it looks like there's been some back and forth rumors this week, but we're going to go with this one as our top story just because it hits so close to home here on the Linux Action Show. And it looks like there could be some bad times ahead, potentially, for MeeGo. Here's what we've got. Is this comes out from an Asia... This is now... Here's the thing. We don't know all the details on this. But this is an Asia-based manufacturer said this. So essentially this came down from Intel was going to start manufacturing tablets to accomplish XYZ and run XYZ, and the orders were all put in to cancel that. And so they're from that leading into this potential rumor that MeeGo could be canceled. DigiTimes is reporting that Intel plans to temporarily discontinue development of MeeGo due to lack of enthusiasm for the platform. And, of course, when reached out, Intel did respond and said, "We remain committed to MeeGo and open source, and we will continue to work with the community to help develop and meet the needs of customers and end users." So, I pulled the chat room on this one, Alan, for a little bit, and they pretty universally seemed negative on this one. I think there's a lot of people that think this rumor might have some truth to it.
It seems like they've decided that MeeGo isn't commercially viable. They still want to do open source and adapt towards what people are going to do, but they don't think the MeeGo would sell very well.
Yeah, and boy, this just comes in 1 week after the whole hubbub about WebOS, right?
Yep.
So unfortunate timing. I'm
Well,
hoping.
then, look at how many people went out and bought touchpads.
Right?
Or
Yeah,
whatever
that's
they're
true.
called, right?
I mean, I'm hoping that this is just false rumors started by one
Right,
manufacturer.
it's just temporarily discontinuing development doesn't seem like you're committed to it.
Yeah, their response.
Basically, they're still committed to the community and to doing open source, but probably not so much to MeeGo.
I agree, and their response had the trappings of just typical PR.
Yeah.
Well, we remain committed. So we'll see. Obviously, we're going to follow the story, and hopefully, we'll have an update in next week's episode, because I think we would be a massive blow to lose MeeGo, especially on the tails of losing WebOS. Now, just a quick mention, because I know a lot of you out there are always fans of meeting in the meet space, as some of us call it, and I want to give a plug to Ohio Linux Fest 2011. And, of course, that's going down September 9th and 11th, so just a couple of days after this show comes out. Actually, today's the 4th that we're shooting this, so it'll be next weekend. And, one of the things that's cool, too, is in terms of other podcasters, I know the Linux Link Tech Show always makes a big show out of going, and so you could probably meet the Linux Link Tech Show guys there at Ohio Linux Fest. So go check that out, and if you go, I would love to see pictures, especially if you're on Google+. Let me know, and I'll circle you up so I can watch your stream while you're at Ohio Linux Fest. That'd be a ton of fun. One last kind of interesting story before we really move into the meat this week, and boy, do we have some meat. This is interesting. This just caught my attention, and I just thought I would share it. Mark Shuttleworth has invested $40,000 in like what you were calling the Bat Phone, which I thought was a good name. This is like a peer-to-peer phone system that it's like a software stack that would sit on top of Android and would allow phones and devices to mesh connect and then enable VoIP over this mesh networking.
Well, it's the same kind of idea as internet peering, right? Yeah, a bunch of smaller ISPs peer directly with each other so that when they have traffic that goes from person A to person, from internally basically, between themselves and one of the ISPs they peer with, they don't do it over their expensive transit connection. They do it over a direct connection between each other.
Sure, and Mark pointed out that services like this could be immensely critical when you have some sort of major disaster where maybe the cell towers are down, or
just overloaded, right?
I mean, it's kind of dark to say this, but we are approaching the anniversary of 9/11, and one of the things that I remember happened is the cell networks just kind of fell over for a little while.
Yeah, right. They lost one major node, and then all the other nodes couldn't handle the additional traffic.
Right.
And having some kind of peer-to-peer system, especially when people are calling within the same general area.
Mm-hmm.
You can bounce off a couple of people to get to the person you want to get to without having to go through the cell phone network. It would leave more of the bandwidth of the cell phone network for your data usage.
Well, the technological revolutionist in me kind of thinks that the long, far out goal of this could maybe just be replacing...
Eliminate
telcos. Yeah.
But
so
this same stuff could have implications in countries where the government controls the phone system.
Oh, absolutely, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's very interesting to see Mark Shuttleworth still out there. This came from the Shuttleworth Foundation, which I believe is also responsible for some of the for the majority of the funding of the Canonical company, which obviously works on Ubuntu. All right, now let's move into some hard-hitting Linux news, Alan, and that stuff.
You skipped one of your news items. Did you?
Oh, did I?
That?
Which one?
The Oracle one?
Let's talk about the Oracle one. That's the next one up right there. This one is an interesting one now because the headline might actually make you poop your pants a little bit, but let's talk about the reality of the situation. The headline is Oracle retires licensing of distributing Java with Linux distributions. Like how a lot of distros would include the Java runtime right out of the box.
Yep.
No more.
Ouch.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. Now, it's called the Operating System Distributor License for Java, the DLJ, and it was created by Sun in 2006. This non-free license allowed Linux distributions to package and distribute Sun and later Oracle's Java with Linux distributions. Now, this does kind of seem like a blow, but here's what Debian's maintainer had to say. He's the guy that maintains the Sun Java package for Debian. He came out and said the need for the Oracle Java implementation has already decreased since the release of OpenJDK 6. He said that the OpenJDK is proven and mature and is the chosen package of most Linux distributions. And here's an interesting supporting fact to that. The current version of OpenJDK 7 is serving as the basis for Oracle's own JDK 7 release. So I think, this is like one of those deals where...
affects BSD, because BSD has a separate license with Sun originally to distribute Java for BSD.
And do you know, is OpenJDK available on BSD?
I don't think so. I don't know.
Oh. Well, this does say they're just discontinuing it with Linux distributions.
Right.
So
but
maybe
I imagine the same thing would mean that when the BSD license for Java expires, they won't offer the option to renew it.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if anybody in the chat room knows, because the issue is that, do you know, is it a licensing issue for JDK?
I don't actually know. But I know FreeBSD for a while didn't have support. Basically, your only option was to run the Linux JDK, the Linux version of the Sun one or the IBM one, in the Linux emulation on BSD. But then you got a direct license from Sun to a real Sun one.
Right. So I guess that would always be an option to go back to, but it's not ideal.
Yeah. Right.
All right, so that's a bit of a downer. We'll see where that goes. So why don't we talk about something a little fun? This is interesting. Yep. A game that's coming out called Blocks That Matter wins $40,000 in a Dream Build Play competition. Now, this is a game coming to Linux called Blocks That Matter, winning $40,000 from Microsoft. They actually won the money because they're using Microsoft's XNA Studio, and they're going to make available like a version for the Xbox and a version for Windows Phone or whatever it is. Right. But they're using that money to fund development for the Linux version. And I just thought, we've been talking about games recently here on the Linux Action Show, and Linux native games are always good to see coming. And it's a platformer, it's a side scroller, and it sort of reinforces something that I learned at PAX. In fact, you guys, go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/PAX. Check out some of the awesome footage we got at PAX last weekend. But I have a link to that in the show notes. This game is going to be a fun little game. There's a lot of these little things that are coming to Linux, these side-scroller platformer games. I probably interviewed, I don't know how many different game developers at PAX, but I would say probably 5 or 6 of the indie side-scroller game makers, the ones that are making games that looks like this Blocks That Matter game that's coming to Linux. They all were making Linux versions.
Yes.
So that's a big deal.
Indie games, it's that even though the Linux market is smaller, those are the people that tend to do indie games more, and just that extra bit of market share makes a big difference to an indie game.
Absolutely.
A commercial game.
And it's good cred with the community, Yep. So I talked to some of them. Go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/PAX and check out some of our video footage there. You can see some of the highlights and a few of the interviews with those guys. But I'm looking forward to this. So Blocks That Matter. Keep your eyes out. Keep your eyes out for that one, because that looks like it's going to be a fun one coming to Linux soon. And they just won money from Microsoft to make it happen. So that's always funny. Nothing like using that award money to go around and make a competing platform game. All right. Yep. Let's talk about some of the serious Linux news that happened this week, and probably the biggest news item is the events that happened at Kernel.org. Kernel.org was, is compromised the right term to use here, Alan?
Yep.
Yeah, they were compromised, and they posted I'll have a link to the message that they posted, but this looks like this could have been a pretty serious breach.
Yes, it had the potential to be disastrous. Luckily, it wasn't.
No, yeah.
So basically, somebody managed to get credentials for one user account through some method. I'm not sure. Log into that one user, and somehow then escalate that to root privileges, and then they replaced OpenSSH with a version with a Trojan in it, installed a widely known rootkit, and a couple other things. And
it doesn't look like they got to any kernel code, though, right?
Right. What could have happened is they could have, if the attack had been deliberately targeted at kernel.org, they would have broke in, been very stealthy, and backdoored the Linux kernel. Wait till that version comes out, gets wrapped up into every distro, and then compromise every Linux box in the world.
Oh, man. That would be a move.
Yeah. But it seems that the attack on kernel.org was your random basically script kiddie type attack where they're just scanning across the entire internet and they managed to find a box they can break into.
So it sounds like they didn't even know what they had.
No, they didn't. It's probably just a random automated or semi-automated attack. And they got in there and replaced OpenSSH, and then, they're like, oh, hey, we got a couple of accounts. And then once they got in with a couple of the machines, then they did, like we've talked about on TechSnap, island hopping, where they jumped from the first server to the second one using credentials that they had gained.
Right. In fact,
people tend to have the same username and password across a bunch of machines.
Yeah.
And sometimes even, you have like a domain type setup, or like we've talked about before with the Yellow Pages service or NIS or LDAP or whatever, where you're using the same accounts for a group of machines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, once you can bounce off a couple of those machines, and if you can do some kind of exploit to get root on every one of them, then...
It's a pretty common setup, too, when you have multiple people that need to administer a system. A lot of times you have shared accounts that you end up using. As backwards as that might seem, it just seems to be so typical. What was interesting, though, about this is the I would say just extremely professional response of the Kernel.org team. They took a lot of their servers offline that were not mandatory to be online. That way they could isolate them and review them. Over this weekend, a lot of the Kernel.org mirrors are down as they're reloading the entire operating systems here.
Because you can never trust the machine once it's been compromised.
And they apparently, they must have had good monitoring in place, right? That's how they caught some of this, was by...
Actually, not so much.
Oh, really?
Specifically, they know the compromise happened no later than August 12th. And they didn't detect it until August 29th.
Oh,
and
okay.
Only because the attackers put on a highly known rootkit that happened to cause a certain debugging message in the kernel. And somebody happened to notice that and be like, why is it doing that? We don't have... It was printing some message about XNest. And they're like, we don't have XNest installed. Why is it doing that?
Oh, geez.
And then they investigated and found, hey, we've been compromised for 3 or more weeks.
Sounds like Sony up in here.
Yeah. But what they did notice was that a couple of their machines that were running the Linux kernel 3.1 release candidate, because they tend to, on some of their machines, they run the newest version as stability testing, right? And they noticed that those machines weren't infected. So they're thinking that either it was already patched, the vulnerability they used was patched in the newer version, or some other change somebody made just happened to spoil the exploit. In which case, the exploit will likely adapt to work around the slight difference in 3.1.
So to back up a hair, what I said they were being really professional, I mean in their...
Disclosure,
the level of detail they're giving, and also the practicality of their approach.
Right. Like, first thing was they didn't assume the kernel source was okay. They assumed it had been, and they had to be gone over and double check and make sure that nobody had modified any of the source code they shouldn't have.
Right.
But yes, I think that all organizations should look at the way that the Kernel.org team handled the disclosure of the exploit and cleaning it up and keeping everybody posted about it, and follow a similar model if anything ever happened to them.
I totally agree. We did go into more depth on this story in TechSnap episode 21 that just came out on the Friday before this, so you can go over to Jupiter Broadcasting and check that out. But one of the things that we just briefly touched on is that if these people had successfully gone further, there is the kernel does use Git, and so they would have like just a new branch that would be modified from that point forward. So they could just go in the Git tree and
basically it wouldn't have been as stealthy if they were using flat files and so on.
Yeah.
Or something older like CVS.
Right.
So yes, because Git uses the SHA hashes, they wouldn't have been able to modify an existing tag and make it look like it hadn't changed when it had.
So while who knows if the one that they would have created would have gotten used, once the kernel team figured it out, they could have gone back before
and backed it out.
Yeah.
But if the attackers had been specifically targeting kernel.org rather than randomly having to stumble across it, they probably wouldn't have installed backdoors and the rootkit and so on, so they wouldn't have been detected. And if they had months of time, they could really slip in the changes little tiny pieces at a time.
Yeah. So, but these are important things to think of. Like the chat room mentions, there's going to be epic FUD over this. Competitors out there could take this and run, and it uses an example. But I think when you look at some of the facts and how it's all being handled, and the fact that nobody is perfect from these kinds of things. Anybody can get attacked. What really matters is how you handle it and how you recover and what preventative measures you had in place. And in this case, they're handling it fantastically. Real pros out there doing this. You can tell these guys really know what they're doing. And the fact that the Git system was in use means they did have a reasonable means to back out should somebody have gotten all the way to the treasure. Is it ideal? Is it perfect? If the person really knew what they were doing, would it have been a save? Maybe not. But in this case, it looks like, while embarrassing, it's not nearly as bad as it could have been.
Yep.
So
And,
that's good.
You know, it goes to show you that Kernel.org, which is mostly run by volunteers, managed to outdo a lot of big corporations that have giant paid IT staffs.
Yeah. Good point.
It's a different level of professionalism.
It is. You're right. It is. And it's kind of refreshing to see that our open source code leaders can also be professional industry leaders, too.
Yep.
So, all right, let's talk about something that both Debian, Ubuntu, and Red Hat all agree on very, very mightily, and that is that you need to go patch your box. There's security advisories coming out this weekend from both Debian, from the Ubuntu team, and Red Hat, and I think by Monday you'll probably see every other distro out there release security updates. Here's the details, folks. If you're an Apache user, you need to check this out. There is a flaw that was found in Apache, the way it handles HTTP headers. A remote hacker could use this flaw to excessively beat on your box and essentially cause
huge load and huge memory usage.
Basically, a low bandwidth for the attacker denial of service, right? Because you could, with very little...
It's an amplification attack. They're making one request, but they're making your Apache do the work of 1,700 requests for each request that they're making. So one user making 50 requests a second, each one of those is making Apache do the work of 1,700 requests.
Now, Alan, you're not an Apache user, are you?
I have a couple of Apache servers, but mostly we don't use Apache.
These kind of things...
Apache is in every... a lot of people are using Apache even if they don't know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of things like...
Linksys routers, for example, or Netgear routers, like the one I talked about at the top of the show. They all use embedded Apache. A lot of Tivoli backup systems, you don't even ever go to a web page, but they render a lot of the back-end stuff using Apache. I mean, it's everywhere.
Apache is in everything.
Yeah. Everybody's got a little Apache in them. And this affects all versions, right?
Yes. This even affects... specifically, it affects 1.3, which is no longer supported. And a lot of people are still using it, and there will be no official patch for 1.3.
There you go.
I highly recommend, if you're still using 1.3, you switch up to 2.2.
To something, yeah. I mean, it's just time. It's just time, everyone.
If you have to use 1.3, you'll have to look for a community patch, because there won't be an official Apache one. There are some mitigation in the official Apache advisory, which I guess came out more than a week ago. Mm-hmm. We covered it on last week's TechSnap, episode 20.
Yep. And then we covered a little bit more in 21.
Yeah.
Right, didn't we?
So maybe. I think I just mentioned that the new version of Apache is out that fixes this.
Oh, okay.
Because at the time of episode 20, they didn't have a new version out. And they promised one in 48 hours and ended up taking more than 24 hours.
So you're saying we were 2 weeks ahead of the rest of the news industry on this?
Well, specifically, the Apache vulnerability announcement was 2 weeks ahead of Red Hat's announcement.
Yeah, well, Red Hat's just came out.
Red Hat couldn't really do anything until Apache released a new version, right?
Debian was pretty hot on the spot. Debian was pretty quick, and so was let's see, when did Ubuntu's come out?
It's like Red Hat. Did they do two? Like, did they do a heads up saying that your Apache server is vulnerable and you need to take this mitigation step?
No.
And then later do one saying the new version's out, you need to upgrade?
No, my understanding is
the new version, and that ended up getting delayed, and so a lot of people were vulnerable for over a week.
Yeah, Ubuntu
Honestly,
got theirs out.
That didn't see more websites getting taken down by this.
Ubuntu got theirs out on the 1st of September, and Red Hat got theirs out, looks like... at the beginning of the month, too. So they all kind of got it around the same time, but Red Hat was the last one of the game, but they have it out. But yeah, no advisory ahead of time, no heads up. You just kind of have to be a TechSnap viewer, I guess.
The official announcement came out on August 24th.
Oh, wow. So they waited till the beginning of September to get their patch out.
I guess that's a week, but...
yeah.
Basically, they were waiting for Apache to release a new version.
Probably, huh?
Likely the issue.
Yeah, they were probably waiting on code.
Yeah,
because they really have no reason to sit on it, and all of the vendors are pretty good.
Like September 1st, right? But usually, like a Red Hat vulnerability announcement includes what you should do to fix it. Now, Apache, when they put out their advisory, they said, here's what you can do to mitigate it, and to fix it, you'll want to install the new version, which we haven't made yet. And I guess that came out on September 1st. So
the always challenge with Red Hat updates is if you want official support, if you do an update and it breaks something, and you want official support, they require that you have all previous updates installed before you install the latest updates. So sometimes what happens with Red Hat Enterprise systems is, it's hard to schedule time for some of these important systems to reboot and take them down to patch, so you fall behind, and then you end up really behind on this kind of stuff. And then you have these emergency patches that you kind of have to get through on public-facing boxes, and so you end up doing like this mad rush patch, and it sometimes breaks stuff. So it's not a great situation whenever you have to do these kind of out-of-band, whatever the IT administrator
and as it is with Red Hat, sometimes you're stuck on much older versions of a lot of the software. Like the default version of PHP that ships with Red Hat is like 5.1 or something.
Yeah. Although I did see a news story that they're taking voting requests for what features to include in the next Red Hat Enterprise Edition. So you can find links to that if you go Google that if you're curious.
And the thing is, I don't know if PHP 5.4 will be ready in time for the new Red Hat.
Yeah.
If it is, that's good. If not, it means Red Hat's going to be stuck behind on 5.3 when everybody else moves ahead to 5.4.
Yeah, and then those Red Hat Enterprise releases sit around for a few years.
Yeah.
It's rough, man.
Now, they do all the security fixes for 5.3, but they never implement new features because those features have the chance to break your code.
And that can bite you in the butt, though.
Useful, but yeah. Really, the only PHP upgrade that broke compatibility was 4 to 5.
4 to 5, yeah.
Right, and that's a major version upgrade, and that makes sense.
But it wasn't for a lot of people. I mean, for some people, it was a big challenge. But for all of the PHP code that I had, it was like go change like the way you start the header file of the header of the file and stuff like that.
There's a couple of things with like the way object-oriented code works, but it wasn't that big a deal.
Right.
And then actually for Red Hat Enterprise Linux and CentOS, Rackspace has an open repository they do that includes the newest versions of MySQL, PHP, Apache,
That's
and a couple other
slick.
things.
And so then they provide support for those?
To everybody. Yeah. So they built an internal one originally just for their customers to have, because everybody wants a web server and then they want the newest PHP so they can run the newest fancy WordPress features or whatever. But they've switched that over to a community project, so it's open to everybody.
That's really cool.
For your Red Hat and CentOS.
I like that. I like hearing cool projects like that at companies like Rackspace. It seems like the right kind of, that's the kind of thing that's right up my alley that as a Rackspace customer I'd be all about. So, love that. All right, Alan. Well, that's all the news for this week. All right, Alan, prepare yourself. I'm going to lay down my Mandriva review for you. Are you ready? I'm ready? Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit different approach with my Mandriva review here. I think a lot of longtime LAS fans know, am a old school Mandriva user. When I got started on Linux, I tried, I think I started with really old Red Hat. I jumped around with Debian, jumped around with Slackware, but the thing I really found my groove in was Mandrake, which is now known as Mandriva. And I revisited Mandriva 2011, which came out 6 days ago as of this recording, and been running it for about the last 5 days. Wanted to see what does Mandriva bring to the table. Why would I want to use Mandriva? And like you asked me on the live stream, Alan, is what does Mandriva got? What's its thing? What's its selling point, right?
Yep.
So just before I show you guys some of the features of Mandriva, let's talk about a couple of those things. Mandriva, if you're not familiar with the history, has been through a lot of changes in the last 2 years, I guess. And some of that has been pretty major corporate structural changes and community changes. One of them is they've decided to go to a yearly major release. So that means that you only get one new major version per year. This is the 2011 release, and let's take a look at some of its features. So also, I should note, one of the interesting things about this is this is the 2011.0, which I think means that you will probably see minor point releases throughout the year, but not major releases. Okay. So one of the things that is interesting about Mandriva 2011 is I'll scroll right down here to this depreciation section. Check this out. Things that are depreciated in Mandrake 2011. GNOME, XFCE, and other desktop environments and window managers are no longer included in the official Mandriva packages, but will be available from the community. That's a pretty big depreciation. GNOME and XFCE, those are big things. So they're really focusing now on KDE. And to that end, they ship with, oh shoot, do you remember what version of KDE it was, Alan?
4.6 something.
4.6.5.
4.6.5.
4.6.5, yep. They're shipping with 4.6.5, but it's a polished 4.6.5. And they're also making a few package tweaks. They're going with something called Clementine instead of Amarok. It's a derivative, I guess, or they say their official wording here is inspired by Amarok. I don't know exactly what that means, but it's a pretty slick-looking cross-platform music player. It seems a little more lightweight than Amarok, perhaps, and that's their default. They've done a few things, like instead of using Kmail, they're using Thunderbird. Instead of using Konqueror, they're using Firefox. But those aren't really big differentiators, right? Those aren't things that make you want to run Mandrake.
It does make it more useful out of the box, though.
It does. So what really, I think, is sort of Mandriva's strong point is the Mandriva suite of tools. They're kind of trying to build a whole tool system. They have something called Mandriva Sync, which is a sort of direct replacement for Dropbox in the most basic form of file syncing. And they also support something called object syncing, though I'm not familiar with what that is, but it might be a way to sync your configuration files. The other thing that they offer is something called Timeframe. Now check out what the explanation of Timeframe is, and this is included in Mandriva 2011. Timeframe is a new utility for NeoPMUC, which I believe is an indexer. I'm not familiar with it, though. It allows you to not think about where you save things like photos and files and documents, but just know the time or the date, and then it gives you like a cloud-based interface to find your files. They have something else called...
I saved that 2 weeks ago. Where to put it?
Yeah, exactly, that kind of thing. They have other things that you might be familiar with, but the ones that I want to talk about is, and here I have, this is if you're watching the video version, Mandriva 2011. Here I have something called, I don't know if they consider these to be, I guess it's still called the Mandriva Control Center. And this is, if you're familiar with OpenSUSE's YAS, this is kind of like that, only their take on it. It gives you an interface to manage your hardware, set up X, manage your sound cards, scanners, configure a UPS attached to your box, configure your network, maybe set up a Samba server, those kinds of things that give you essentially a Python GUI interface to sit on top of managing things like network shares. So let's say if we wanted to share a drive using NFS, for example. Actually, I just had somebody write me and asking me how you do this. I would just, in the Mandriva Control Center, just click on this component. It starts the NFS server, and then it's really just as simple as saying add. I browse to the directory that I want to share out. Let's say I want to share out my downloads directory. And hit OK. I say who can access it. If I want to allow user ID mapping, which I think actually I probably would, and it gives you explanations of what those things are. It seems to be they strike a real balance between advanced user configuration but also usability. Like there's a lot of options here that you wouldn't expect to be exposed to you in a GUI, but then when you go to use it, it's nice that they're there. But then in some cases, there's options that you would think would be there that aren't offered. So but for the most part, it's a really solid end-to-end solution for setting these things up. So then I just would say OK, for example, and say OK here, and now this computer has an NFS share that it's sharing out.
That
Pretty
is,
nice, right?
Rather than having to do it by hand.
Yeah, exactly. It's things like, they have the same thing for managing your drive partitions. You can go in here and say manage disk partitions. This is really nice for people who are not comfortable with Linux.
Yeah. Like, is the partition thing based on gparted or?
I think so, yeah. All of these tools, you can go in any Mandriva tool, you can go to help, and then they have at least maybe not in every, display options, display logs. And it actually, in the background, tells you which commands it's executing. The actual command line. So that's kind of a neat way to learn, too. Like, I'll give you... Yep. See, so I just did some stuff, and you can see it's changing some permissions on some directories. Now, if I go in here and I say, browse and configure hardware, you can see that it'll start running a bunch of commands. And these are the commands it's running to probe my hardware in the background, which is kind of neat. Right. This might actually be a good opportunity to mention, though, where I feel like there's this gulf in Mandriva still between ease of use and sort of old-school Linux way of doing things before we had better way of doing them.
Right.
I'll give you an example. I have it on my laptop. That's my main day-to-day machine that I carry around. And I put Mandriva 2011 on this, and it loaded up. I got 3D support working. I was able to go in and turn on the Compiz video effects, but I noticed my performance was a little crappy. You know, like I had a low frame rate, just like moving windows across the screen. You know, like I could almost see it stuttering, and so I looked into how to fix that. And I thought, you know, am I running with 3D enabled exactly, or is this 2D compositing? What's going on here? And I never saw anything about installing a proprietary 3D driver until one day I was playing around in this hardware center, and I clicked around in here, and I just happened to click on my video card, and it said, oh, hey, by the way, there's a better driver. Would you like to use that? And then went out and downloaded and installed it.
And then your performance wasn't crap anymore.
Yeah, exactly. But why not prompt for that out of the gate? It just seemed kind of like an odd way to go about doing it.
Well, even Ubuntu yells at you when you try to install the proprietary drivers.
It does, but at least it prompts you, I guess is what I'm saying, out of the box. But you know, no big deal really. The other thing that's interesting to note about Mandriva is it is a RPM based distribution. Doesn't use apt, but it doesn't just use vanilla RPM. You know how like Fedora has Yum that sits on top of RPM? Well, Mandriva has something called URPMI, and it is fantastic. It's a little slow, in my opinion. It's a little slow. Like for example, when you're using their package manager and you're browsing the package and you click on it to get the description, it has to contact their server, download the package information, and that feels like it takes a long time. But it is...
We get around that in BSD with a mini SQL database. I think it's SQLite database.
Something a little local, right, that you cache locally.
Yeah. Well, sorry, that's what Yum does. Sorry, it's a SQLite database, I think. And
that would be nice.
In BSD, we have a text index file, a Berkeley database file, and then a directory structure.
And so your performance is just as fast as your disk I/O, really.
Yeah.
URPMI is a pretty sophisticated system that sits on top of RPM, handles your dependency resolution, handles remote repositories, handles upgrades really well, handles conflict resolution. I mean, I love URPMI. You know, you can never really have to use it on the command line using just the Mandriva graphical tools, or you can bust out and learn what an amazing tool it is on the command line. It really is, you know, like I remember back in my Mandrake days, I could URPMI, put the URL of a repo, put some commands in there, and I would have it added, and I could just URMPI and then the name of the package, and boom, it installed just like apt. You know, and this is before Yum was around. It was so nice to have RPM taken care of like this. They still use it, and I love it. So it's something to check out. Now, Alan, in terms of features that are uniquely Mandriva, why don't we talk about the RocketBar? So the RocketBar is the branch of the KDE menu at the bottom here. They're taking there's a separate project out there that's taking the KDE menu, and they're going a different direction with it. And one of the things that's unique about it is specifically split up more like a traditional start menu, where you have your quick launch icons, you have a middle space for your running applications, and then at the end you have like your tool tray and stuff like that. But check out this bold menu that Mandriva rocks. I'm about to click the menu button. Boom, comes up, full screen menu. When you click on the little KDE start menu, it is a full screen, takes over your entire screen menu, and it's interesting. I'm still definitely adapting to it. It feels like a 1.0 product to me. Like I can't customize, as far as I can tell, this first page. I can't have a favorites area and stuff like that, and that's a little clunky. So then when I have to go digging for apps, I just find this to be a little bit of a tedious interface. It does have some niceties.
Obviously, some kind of, like in most things in KDE, there's a little scale bar in the bottom right corner where you can change the size of the objects.
I don't see that. I don't see that option here.
That menu is nice, but especially if maybe you have a touch screen, and so you want big fat icons to point at.
Yeah.
But if you're doing this here, smaller icons where you could have more on the screen at once and less scrolling would probably be better for desktop interface, right?
Yeah, so I'm mixed on it, that's for sure. I'm definitely mixed on it. And I guess that's where I might have an issue with their once-a-year release.
Yeah. If you're stuck with that for a year, then that would be annoying.
And I totally grok and appreciate the once-a-year release. In fact, the chat room on the pre-show was saying maybe Ubuntu should go to an 8-month cycle like OpenSUSE. Stretching it out does seem like a good thing. Calm down, let me get used to my home, but keep my apps updated, but let me just have a home and live there for a little while. But when there's some glaring issues, I I just don't know if I want to wait a year for that to be fixed, and that's where I start to appreciate the more rapid 6-month cycle. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of a trade-off of you want rapid but very small changes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because, once a year is not so bad, but if the changes are huge and it takes you 3 months to get used to it every time, then, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of changing everything.
Yeah, I agree. But I'll leave you with this. Mandriva does have some niceties. First of all, it kind of feels like it might be a refugee spot for GNOME 2.0 hardcores. It's KDE, but not as you know it. It feels very GNOME. It uses Dolphin for your file browsing. It was very clean. Has a single menu. It uses Firefox and Thunderbird. It feels very much like you're at home if you're a GNOME user, but you also get a lot of the toys of KDE 4, which, to be honest, are kind of nice. And so I would say if you are one of those people who feels a little bit disenfranchised with Unity, you feel a little bit unsure about GNOME 3, check out what they're doing here with KDE 4 in Mandriva. I think you might actually be kind of impressed from that angle. And really, their application selection is pretty darn good too, so that you're not that bad either. While I'm not sure if this would make me switch from another distro, I'm pretty impressed. I'm not saying it's switch time, but I'm pretty impressed. I would like to see where they're going with this, but I don't know if I want to wait a year. I know they'll do point updates, so I'll probably check in midway through the year. But at this point, I really want Mandriva to do well because it's been around for a long time. But at this point, I'm not completely clear on what its super strengths are, other than I do really like those Mandriva Control Center tools. And if you're a Linux user just starting out, you want to set up a Samba server and NFS server, and you want to learn how to do it, but you're not sure where to start, this could definitely be a good place for you. And honestly,
the combination of having the normal config way, but having a GUI that supplements it.
I think a long time ago, that's what originally drew me to Mandrake. So that could be the feature right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's something. So go check out Mandriva. I got links in the show notes, as well as a comparison to Mangia, which is a distro based on Mandriva, and a link to another reviewer who I happen to agree with quite a bit, so I put a link in there, and also a complete feature tour of all of the really interesting things that Mandriva is doing. I guess I'll wrap up the review on this note. I don't know if it's the distribution for me, but it's a distribution that's being bold and taking its own direction and not alienating users as they do it. Ubuntu's being bold with Unity, and that's awesome. That's great. Some distros are being bold and implementing GNOME 3 as their default. I believe Mandriva is being bold in the sense that they're delivering a new user experience, but they're not pissing me off while they're trying to do it. In fact, if anything, I would say this is the most rational, what we're used to type of desktop implementation that still comes off being elegant and well done. So I will give Mandriva 2011 major props for doing that. And if you get a chance to try it, leave us a comment in the show notes and let us know what you think. What do you think, Alan?
I always prefer KDE myself. So.
Yeah. You have now you're a BSD guy, but do you have any KDE thoughts with PCBSD? You ever tried that?
I run just KDE raw FreeBSD, but yeah.
You might be impressed with the PCBSD guys do, though.
I've tried it out, and I like it. It's just that basically, they're not doing anything I can't do myself, right?
Right.
And more, I just prefer to roll my own just because that's how I do it.
Hey, when you roll your own, it's always best. Everybody prefers their own brand, Alan. That's the truth.
Yep.
All right, Alan. Well, that's the Linux Action Show's look at Mandriva 2011. All right, Alan, and that does wrap up this very episode of the Linux Action Show. Now, we should be back at Sunday next week live at 10 a.m. Pacific. The B-Man should hopefully be back unless he's still on that meth run or is still sick. I can't remember which one it was. But, Alan, before I let you go, I got to give a mention for TechSnap.
Yes.
TechSnap is the show that you and I do. In fact, you can join us live Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific or download it Friday morning over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. I guess, one thing we could mention is we have a TechSnap subreddit page. People could kind of check out what the show's about just by going to that, links.techsnap.tv.
Yes, and when you promote a story there or look at the stories that are there, because those oftentimes are ones that get mentioned on the show, but if you submit stuff there, then that helps us find the content and do it.
Yeah.
But also, because it's Reddit, you can use it to ask a question there. And if you ask a question there and it gets voted up, maybe we'll cover it. And because one of the things we do on TechSnap is looking at questions people have and answering them. Because like you and I have said before, it's like we work as consultants. We charge people a lot of money to answer their questions. And you can get it for free by sending your questions into the show.
Yeah, doing it for free on TechSnap. Check it out.
Actually, over the 3 previous weeks, we've covered, somebody had a question of, I have a server and I want to make it redundant. So I put up a second server, but how do I make it switch back and forth at the right time?
Right.
And we covered 3 entirely different solutions to doing that.
I really like that. I think we should keep that up. I think we will keep that up in future episodes of TechSnap. Now, you can also check the show notes for links to all the stories we talk about, stuff about Mandriva I covered, and also links to my Google Plus profile, Alan's Google Plus profile, and our Twitter pages if you'd like to get a hold of us. Those are probably the best way to do it. And also JupiterColony.com, where you can leave feedback for this episode right there in our forum and let all of the other colony members read your thoughts and join in the conversation. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Linux Action Show, and we'll see you right back here next Sunday. I just sent you magic signals. Did you like that?
No.